Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, May 4th, 2024, and today we're going to be talking about New York's 26th Congressional District special election that shows an overperformance yet again for the Democratic Party in this year's wave of congressional elections. Now, we haven't talked much about special elections in quite some time. The most recent one that we really gave a high-profile notice was in 2024, earlier on this year, when we had Tom Suozzi, who was previously the representative from George Santos's New York 3rd Congressional District here. He decided to run for the special election after George Santos was expelled from the U.S. House of Representatives here, which was a flip for the Democratic Party. Now, this was a major victory for Democrats. It was the first true test of the 2024 election cycle, and Democrats passed with flying colors. They did a phenomenal performance here, flipped the district from what was a George Santos +8 district into a Tom Suozzi +8 district. They had a full 16-point swing across the district itself, and it showed good signs for Democrats amidst a number of declining polling numbers, whether they came down to the president's approval rating, whether it came down to the general election head-to-head matchup here. Ultimately, this special election in February of 2024 was a good sign for the Democratic Party. But it was one of many that we have seen since the 2022 midterm elections here. The last time Republicans saw a significant overperformance in any type of congressional or Senate or gubernatorial election, special election or not, was in Texas's 34th district, where Republican Mayra Flores, who has since been lost re-election to the House of Representatives here, she defeated a Democrat in a congressional district that had a partisan index of Democrat +5. It had previously been won by Democrats by double digits here, and the Republicans flipping it was the first major stepping stone for them to have a red wave year in the midterm elections. It predicted from that point onward that Republicans were going to demolish when it came down to the House elections, to the Senate elections, but ultimately, the Dobbs decision happened and everything went different. From the moment the Dobbs decision was struck down, in which we saw the Supreme Court rule that a woman's right to abortion was not protected in a woman's right to privacy by the Constitution, everything changed. It wasn't just the way that we discussed elections, the way that people perceived the election. It was quite literally everything about our election results and our election data seemed to be thrown out the window. Because special elections, the first one that we saw, was Nebraska's first congressional district here, where the special election resulted in a Republican victory of just 5 percentage points. Now, forgive me, but this is not a strong showing for the Republican Party, and by the time November came around, the Republicans in the 1st District got their stuff together. They ended up winning by roughly 15 points in this district here, but the special election was the first true sign that the tides were turning, that the Republican wave that was set up by Texas's 34th District was not going to be perpetuated following the Dobbs decision. Then came Minnesota's 1st District, a Trump double-digit district in which Brad Finstad won his race to become the next representative from Minnesota's 1st as a Republican by just under 4 points. A Trump double-digit district condensed down to a 4-point victory. And then came Alaska, where Mary Peltola became the first Democrat to win here in over 50 years. Then came New York's 19th district here, in which the Democrats won in a Republican district, a partisan index of Republican +3, the Democrats came out ahead. And then in New York's 23rd district, a 6-point margin of victory in a district that Donald Trump won by double digits that had a partisan index of Republican +9. And so 2022, all the special elections leading into the November election indicated that things were going to change. And change they did. The Democrats expanded their majority in the United States Senate, nearly maintained control of the House of Representatives, and then came 2023. And the discussion went back to where it was in 2022. Republicans, with President Biden's approval rating in a bad point, the head-to-head matchup data in a bad point, and generally speaking, Republicans were much more confident about their chances in 2023, not because they had any mainstream special elections going on, but that there were governor elections coming up with Democratic incumbents in the state of Kentucky and Louisiana. But 3 important races, Kentucky, Louisiana, and Mississippi, all states that Donald Trump won by 20 points or more in 2016 and nearly 20 points or more in 2020. And Democrats had incumbents in 2 of them. In one case, they were retiring. Governor John Bel Edwards from Louisiana decided that he was going to take a step back. He couldn't run constitutionally anyway and wasn't going to run for Senate. He decided that he was going to not run for, not decided that he's not going to run. He decided to completely withdraw, essentially, from Louisiana politics. And so you found here, the Republicans knew that that was an automatic pickup. But the Democrats had a fighting chance in Kentucky. And fight they did, and win they did. Andy Beshear, the Democrat, in a race that he won in 2019 by a margin of 0.4%. 0.4%. 0.36% if we're being specific about it. He decided he was going to run for re-election. And despite being someone who was a relatively popular Democratic governor, he was still running in a state that Donald Trump won by over 30 points in the last race. Donald Trump demolished Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden. Republicans do very well in Kentucky. Kentucky is a red state. And so for Andy Beshear here to win by 5 points against the incumbent attorney general in the state, someone who had known how to win a statewide race, it was a very big victory for the Democratic Party and stood in direct contrast with a lot of what we've seen. Then in Mississippi, Brandon Presley, the Democrat here, came within 3 points of winning. 3 points of winning in deep red Mississippi. I mean, we know a lot about these southern states, but we generally know their partisan composition is almost never conducive to a Democratic Party victory. And yet, it almost happened. And so you have to ask, why is it that despite all of this conversation here, the numbers showing good things for President Trump, the popularity rating for President Biden decreasing, all these estimations that Democrats are going to be losing and not Republicans, and yet in all of these elections here, we are seeing Democrats do well? Well, 2024 supposedly was going to be different. We were sold on this idea that because it was a presidential election year, we were finally going to see the effects of President Biden being unpopular, being the no longer national favorite against Donald Trump. And yet, we seem to be proved wrong under that analysis. I already told you about the New York 3rd District here, but I mentioned this in the very beginning, and I think it continues to really exemplify this point here. The Democratic Party in New York's 26th district here, this was not a competitive race, but it is these races that Republicans should really be shining through. What I showed you about 2022 and 2023 was to remind you of the same exact things we saw in 2017 and 2018. When Democrats had significant overperformances in congressional elections and in gubernatorial elections, it was a heavy indication that the next presidential election, it was going to flip to the Democratic Party. The performances for Democrats in the House in 2018, flipping over 40 seats, that was a big thing for the Democratic Party. Conor Lamb's victory in Pennsylvania was a big thing. All of these things seem to indicate not only the victories, but the moral victories. The narrowing of Kansas's 4th district with Ron Estes, who ended up winning, but by a very narrow margin. The narrowing of Georgia's 6th district with Jon Ossoff, who lost his House race, then went on to become a United States Senator, which is, crazy in its own right. But it is interesting to see, because it seems like we are gearing up for the 2020 election in terms of actual election results, but the polling numbers just don't seem to be reflecting that. And yet, with every single instance where we have actual election data, we can see that fundamentally, the elections between 2020 and 2024 lean left. And the more popularized and more important elections, like the congressional ones, the Republicans should be showing significantly better showings than what they are doing right now. And yet, Democrats ultimately still come out ahead. And not only do they come out ahead, but they come ahead further. They do more than they did in the last election. Because this district here in 2022 voted for the Democratic Party by a very, very similar margin, but it was a Democratic incumbent, and Democrats, quite frankly, in the House of Representatives, did quite well. Even in 2020, when the district ended up being redrawn more beneficial to the GOP, the Democrats got around 69.9% of the vote. In this race, they got 68.6%. In 2022, Democrats performed with 63.9%. This is an outperformance for the Democratic Party. This is a very strong showing. It goes to show just exactly how the Democratic Party seems to be able to rally together and put together their base in elections where people are actually voting. But when it comes down to nationalized polling, when it comes down to statewide polling, it doesn't seem to be reflective. And it is so fascinating, too, to see that President Biden, for as much as he has been the Republican Party's go-to person to attack, doesn't seem to be having as much of a negative impact on the Democratic Party's chances as a lot of people were expecting. Even if Joe Biden is to lose the presidential election, when we take a look at a lot of these down-ballot House and Senate polls here, especially the generic ballot polls, I would rather be a Democrat than a Republican based on a lot of what we were seeing here. When you look at the generic congressional vote, the Democrats actually have a national lead. Despite Donald Trump leading and President Biden being down 16, 17 points in terms of approval, the Democrats still come out ahead. When it comes down to Senate races here, we can see that in almost all of the competitive races, for example, Arizona Senate, or Michigan Senate, or Nevada Senate, or Pennsylvania Senate, or Wisconsin Senate, it is quite literally all of these competitive districts and states. Arizona Democrats up by 6, Michigan Democrats up by 1, Nevada Democrats up by 7, Pennsylvania Democrats up by 6, Wisconsin Democrats up by 5. It is relentless at the way that the Democratic Party has been able to maintain such an advantage across all of the down ballot races, in all of the special elections, in all of the fundraising data, in everything else except these nationalized head-to-head polls between Biden and Trump. And while the easy answer might be here that maybe Biden is just the weak candidate, and I don't know if that's something that needs further investigation, because what I do understand and I do believe to be true is that in 2022, the polls didn't line with what they're telling us in 2024. In 2022, the polls told us that the Democrats were going to lose Arizona, they were going to lose Nevada, they were going to lose Georgia, they were going to lose Pennsylvania, and they were probably going to lose states like New Hampshire. They were probably going to lose a number of other states that would have otherwise not been competitive, and Republicans were going to have a steamroll election, maybe even Washington's Senate race, which was in 3 points according to the polling data. And yet, by the end of it, Democrats came out ahead. And a lot of us reflected and said, where did we go wrong? Even I personally predicted that Republicans were going to win control of the Senate. They were going to win control of the House easily, 30, 40 seats picked up. And yet that didn't happen. And so in that reflection, we looked at what we were looking at to predict this election. In this case, it was expert ratings. In this case, it was polling data. But what we ignored was the fundraising data. What we ignored was the incumbency advantage that Joe Biden will also have in this election. And what we also ignored very, very heavily were these special elections that were the early warning signs that maybe the races weren't going the way that the national polls had predicted. Because Republicans did end up winning the national popular vote. The national popular vote, the GOP won by roughly 3 points. And with a 3-point victory, given that Democrats had won the popular vote in 2020 by 5, in 2018 by 8, that Hillary Clinton had won it by 2, the standard assumption was that there was no way that Democrats were going to win any of these swing states if Republicans were winning the national vote. And yet it happened. And the predictive factor for that wasn't the generic ballot. And it wasn't these, hyper-sensationalized takes that a red tsunami was coming, but rather the actual election data, where people actually went to the polls and we saw an overperformance for Democrats. Because it is eerily reminiscent of what we saw in the elections between 2016 and 2020. And yet our narrative on this election is entirely different. Why? Because the polls that once predicted a Joe Biden victory are now predicting a Donald Trump victory. But here's my problem. Usually these things align. In this instance, they do not. And so when they do not align, something has to give. And I am personally under the assumption that it is more beneficial for us to look at the actual data of elections where people are voting than in the elections where people are not. The polls are not real elections. And while they do offer some insight, and I'm not here to discredit them entirely, because I think they are truly valuable. I think there is merit to a lot of what we are seeing, and I think they reveal some of the weaknesses that the Biden campaign has, that the top ticket presidential election has, that down ballot Democrats simply do not. But I reject this idea that 2024 is unequivocally going to be a Trump landslide, that 2024 is going to be a massive Republican victory, because we know that it's not. And the data tells us that it is not going to be. Even if you cherry pick some of these polls, the averages don't suggest a red tsunami. The averages don't even suggest a red wave year. And I even question if Republicans will come out ahead on November 6th, 2024. Because I do believe that despite all of this media frenzy around Donald Trump surging and Joe Biden collapsing in the election data, there would be a reason to believe that if everything else, fundraising data, rallies and appearances, special election data, which is a very, very high indicator, and also Joe Biden's midterm elections, where Democrats expanded their seats in the Senate and barely lost the House and won the majority of the toss-up districts, unlike what it was in 2020. It is interesting, at the very least, that we spend such little time talking about the elections that actually are conducted and so much time talking about the polls. And I get it. These elections don't happen often. But I want us to understand that there's a lot more in consideration than just the polls that Rasmussen shows that Donald Trump has a 12-point lead over Joe Biden. There's a lot more to this election than simple focus groups being done in pockets of the country that do, in fact, show a decrease in support for President Biden, and we see that. But it isn't to say that it's a done deal or that Donald Trump has this election in the bag, because it is that level of thinking and complacency that loses Republicans' elections. They've done it before, and they may, in fact, do it again. And so there's a reason too as to why I personally have a much higher chance of victory, in terms of my odds, in terms of my prediction here for Joe Biden than I think a lot of other people do. And that's because we look at this data and, arguably speaking, take into account more than just the national punditry and the national polls. Because there is more to an election than just that. 2020 was very different. Everything coincided and everything made sense. This time, none of it really makes sense. It's a very hard election to predict, and granted, I may be wrong come November. But as of right now, what we are seeing in districts like New York's 26th and New York's 3rd, and we saw in Mississippi and Kentucky and in the 2022 midterms, don't bet against Democrats because a lot of the time they will prove you wrong. Despite everything else that we might be seeing from Politico, Washington Post, New York Times, X, Y, and Z, elections are what matters, and for some reason, Democrats continue to outperform. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.